Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Why It Matters. Hi, I'm Tracy Kronzek, and I'm joined here with my always stalwart companion, coadjutator, also boss, Tim Lockey.
Hey, welcome to the
Uh,
show. Glad you could make it.
we are incredibly excited for today's conversation. This represents as much of a down home kind of feeling conversation to, I think, me personally, as it does a completely new endeavor for what we've always assumed is true and false around our work in nonprofits and digital economies and impact. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to a longtime friend and mentor, Kevin Bromer, who is, I'm going to read your title right off the website, Executive Director, Head of Technology and Data Strategy at the Ballmer Group in Washington. Kevin, tell us a little bit about that and what you're doing right now.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, Tim, Tracy, thank you both so much for having me. Really appreciate it. And it is an honor to continue to get the opportunity to spend time with you both. Really, really glad to do that. But so, yeah, it's a long title. So I try and always keep it short. So you just go like tech and data. But yeah, the role is really a new role at Ballmer Group. And Ballmer Group obviously is really a relatively new organization as a whole. But my job, I really say, is sort of two things that I really do at Ballmer Group. First and foremost is really my job is to help support our colleagues in the overall Ballmer Group mission, which is really focused on socioeconomic mobility for underserved communities kind of throughout the greater United States. And, I do that by helping to make sure that my colleagues are making smart investments in technology and data projects, both with local and state government, as well within the nonprofit community, and really help to provide whatever level of expertise and guidance I can to those projects, to those program officers, to those executive directors who are my colleagues at Ballmer Group. So that's kind of about 50% of the job, is just sort of giving a little bit of the technology project sniff test, if you will, right? This seems about right. I'm not so sure these folks over here have any idea what they're talking about. Let's ask some more questions about this one, right? So that's about half the job. The other half of the job is really about, my own set of investments around technology and data, and how we as an organization sort of buttress and support the overall technology sector, both for those nonprofit organizations who are doing the really hard work on the ground, and wherever relevant, what we sort of colloquially think of as kind of B2C, right, in support of issue areas that are directly impactful to citizens in the United States. And so things like the digital divide is a really a burgeoning area of work for us, and not just connectivity and access, but affordability and digital skill building, sort of all three legs of the stool that you need to take somebody from a place of not having those skills to being sort of a fully formed digital citizen in this country in the modern age. We also think a lot about benefits access as well around that. So how do we, you saw that in the course of the pandemic, everybody's old COBOL system sort of keeled over as unemployment insurance came due for everybody, right? And we pulled out all of the folks with the long gray ponytails to come back and remember their Fortran skills. And so how do we avoid that in the future, right? How do we make that easier and give access to earned benefits for members of the community who haven't otherwise wouldn't otherwise be able to have that level of access to that? And then, of course, the final piece of that, and within my own portfolio, is thinking about the broader field of technology as a whole, and what can we do as a funder to help sort of buoy that field and build capacity within nonprofit organizations, build capacity within the nonprofit sector. Again, not just for the sake of building capacity, that's incredibly important, but because those organizations are the ones that are really impacting lives on the ground in very significant ways. So it's a dual mandate, it's a dual job, and that's part of, frankly, for me, what makes it such a exciting place to be, because it's, we're, like I said, we're a young organization, still evolving, still changing, and it's a great time to be a part of defining what we want that future to look like and that mission to look like.
I'm going to follow up with two things on that, Kevin. One is, you're not kidding when you say COBOL and Fortran, by the way. Like, I think you and I are the kind of people who speak in metaphor, and like sometimes that's a metaphor for tech dinosaurs, but actually for a lot of state governed employment and state database systems, we're literally talking about COBOL and Fortran. But the question that I want to ask you to dig into more is, you talked about obviously bridging the digital divide as a key component to the work that Ballmer Group is trying to do. And I feel like right before we hit record on this thing, we had started down the path of what are the factors that are contributing to that digital divide, and what are the actual remediations. And I think, I've always personally said, like, golly, if I could make $125,000 a year doing tech for a nonprofit, I'd never leave a nonprofit. But salary is one of the. So the question is what are the components that you're looking at that are more holistic than just a single dollar amount? And how are you measuring them? Or have you not gotten there yet?
Well, yeah, there's a lot there, right? And I think you can think about the digital divide in a lot of different ways, right? So, I mean, I think at a basic level, we sort of think about the estimated 16.9 million kids who don't have regular access to learning technology in the school, and that was pre-pandemic. We'd like to think that number is getting a little bit better. The reality is we don't know, right? As a colleague put it, we've just spent the last year conducting the biggest experiment in digital connectivity across the United States in history, and we have no idea what worked. We've got anecdotal evidence, we might have regional evidence, or sort of can draw a circle around the community and say this program we think was effective for this community, but we really don't know all of the answers to that. And so I think that in and of itself, we're in a period of discovery in terms of figuring out, okay, we just shot a whole bunch of bullets at this problem, right? We just tried a whole bunch of different things. What really landed, and then how do we as a philanthropic funder sort of put more weight behind that and make sure that we're really broadening that effort and that opportunity to expand overall access. So that's like the individual sort of digital divide question. There's obviously a lot of other facets to that, and we could probably spend the next 45 minutes just talking about that. But there's also this question of, what I really think of as overall capacity building in the nonprofit sector as a whole, which you could also refer to as a very significant digital divide, right? You walk into a lot of nonprofit organizations, they're working off a piece of paper and a pen, which obviously I have in front of me as well, but I'm also looking at a computer, and I'd like to think I know how to use one fairly well at this point, right? And not a lot of folks have that necessarily in the nonprofit space, and it's a multifaceted problem. A lot of which has to do with access to technology, so software licenses, hardware, those kinds of things. Those are easily solvable problems, right? We know how to do that. A lot of vendors, a lot of great organizations like a TechSoup, right, have really dedicated themselves to saying, hey, we're going to solve for the you need seat licenses kind of problem, right? And so really smart people within those organizations like N10 and others have really dedicated their lives to that, are doing phenomenal work around that. So we want to help support those efforts where we can, but great people sort of working on that already. But there's sort of other issues there that are challenging. It's not just about putting the software in front of somebody and sort of like hoping for the best, right? You also have to take the time and energy to make sure that the individual utilizing that software has the skills and the capacity to be able to do that effectively and to execute on that effectively. And it's not detrimental to their day-to-day work, right? There's nothing worse than going and asking a $25,000 a year employee who's already working 10 hours a day, just trying to do their best, to say, hey, I need you to stay another 90 minutes later because we're going to learn this newfangled piece of software. Trust me, it'll make your life better. Probably sometime in the next couple of years. I don't know. We'll see. Right. I mean, that's a really, really hard sell for that person. And yet we ask folks to do that over and over and over and over again. So we have to figure out how to not only make the software available, we have to figure out how to make the training accessible and that digital skilling a core part of everybody's day-to-day. It's not an extra. It's not something you do off the side of your desk. It's a core part of your job is to be able to continue to evolve and learn. But then we also have to incentivize people in the nonprofit sector to stay. And right now, that's a really big challenge in the sector, as we were discussing, right? The Bureau of Labor Statistics tells us pretty squarely and easily, like if you're in the social sector, odds are you're one of the lowest tenured people in the entire economy, period, bar none. And so
across all job functions, is that, or is it specific job? How?
Yeah,
I did not know that.
Yeah, it's worth going to look at the data. The BLS does great work around this, and it's really stunning to see, quite frankly. And then we sit around as funders and as technology experts and go like, gosh, how 2 years later, how did that project go off the rails? Well, I thought we really nailed that. And you go and you look at it, it's like, oh, well, the folks who were there who made all those decisions, they just simply aren't there anymore. They've gone on and they've moved on to the next thing, and they've left the vestiges of the software project sort of kind of on the ground beside them. And so, figuring out how we, as a sector, incentivize the retention of high quality people who want to impact their communities, who want to be there, who want to do that really great work, but also want to have a career and want to better their economic outcomes and their economic lives for themselves and for their family. Those two things shouldn't have to be a tension, and yet right now where we are as a society, they are. And it's easy to say, well, hey, you're a funder, why don't you just give everybody more money? And that's fair. I think that's absolutely, we should be thinking about that as a funder. But the nonprofit sector is like it's like a $1.8 trillion sector in revenue, right? Something like that in revenue.
Is that like yearly? That's the total addressable market, right? It's over $1 trillion a year.
Yeah, that's the nonprofit revenues, right? So that's the money. That's the money they're taking in. I know my funder, he's a wealthy gentleman, of course, but we can't eat $1.73 trillion a year, right? I mean, we can't, right? It's like, that's not enough.
Maybe Rupert Murdoch can, but that's about it, right?
Right. So it's and that's every year too, right? I mean, I think that's the other big point, right? It's not just that's a yearly number, so it's not just solving it for 1 year, right? Plugging the digital divide for a year, right? Making sure everybody has access to high quality broadband. Funders could plug it for a year. The question is what do you do next year? What does 2024 look like? How do you ensure that those programs are sustainable and you're fixing the problem and not just trying to salve a wound?
Yeah, I think, the picture that comes to my mind is, just because you put out a bird feeder, does it actually mean you're feeding birds, or are you just giving more supplies to the squirrels? And that's kind of, that's kind of the challenge, right? And
squirrel, I'm like so distracted by this. Like,
I'm trying to figure out. I need to write down who I got to figure out who the birds and the squirrels are in this.
What does that mean? Like that is blowing my mind.
But this is a phenomenon. Like, my background is in consulting, and this is a phenomenon I've seen for years, and we've known about this. You're a consultant on the ground with an organization, and if that project takes more than 6 months, you're not working with the same people who started it, period. Right. And, so what I like about what you're saying is that and to the point that I was making, right before we hit record, and that is, there's those of us who come from a purist background who will very easily point to just more money, just more technology, just more time, just more whatever. And what I like in what you're saying is that it's saying, okay, yes, we do need these things, but don't fool yourself into believing that this is the only thing that's going to solve the problem, because that $1 trillion discussion is exactly where it's at. And when it comes to the kinds of work that you're doing at Ballmer Group, there is a very clear statement on the website about, we want to advance racial equity. Now, as somebody who has a background in that, and also even an earlier background in queer activism, I would also say there's a damn good argument to make for when I look at homeless statistics and see 40 to 60% of the homeless kids are LGBT identified, right? So there's all of these things. How do you set priority, or are you still in the process of setting priority and really understanding the totality of this kind of problem?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a really good question. So I think, first of all, I think, as I mentioned, we're a young organization, and so a lot of what's happening right now for us is, hey, let's keep doing the good things that we want to do, right, and the good things that we believe are going to be impactful and beneficial for the sector as a whole, but also be constantly in this state of sort of reevaluation of, or do we have the right set of priorities? Are we thinking about these things in the right way? Are we being responsive and agile to the moment, but also continuing to stay strategic and long-term kind of in our outlook and how we do that? So, it's definitely that constant internal conversation that, to be quite frank, is fun. I mean, it's really interesting as somebody who has long sort of viewed myself as wanting to sit at sort of that nexus of the nonprofit and the philanthropic and the technology sector as a whole. Like, how do we weave these things together well? Talking about the priorities of a funder from the inside has been just a fascinating and just frankly a humbling and rewarding experience for my part, and obviously hopefully making some good choices or doing our best to make the right choices for the sector as a whole, certainly. Priorities for us, I mean, I don't know that we have sort of outside of that core mission statement a concrete set of first this, then this, then this, then this, then this. We have preferred vehicles through which we think things are particularly effective. We certainly have populations that we believe we can have an outsized impact and influence on, and underserved communities, particularly communities of color, the data is really stark, really apparent, especially when you begin to look at sort of population level statistics around what's happening in those communities, and the role that you can have as a philanthropist in really bending the outcomes in really positive ways for those communities, I think is very much always at the front of our mind around that, right? Very much how we kind of think about and approach that work. The vehicle through which we do that as well, I think, is something that we have organizationally prioritized, and really thinking about kind of what we refer to as kind of the power of place, right? This idea that, nothing about us without us, right? If you think about some of those, community data involvements, I'm sure you've heard that expression before, right? And that's a really powerful and meaningful expression in my mind, because what it means is our job as a funder is not just to fund, the large nationally scoped organizations, but it's to partner with place-based partnerships, either through networks or through individual community partnerships, who can really look at a community and recognize that in order to address digital divide, we have to also address the early childhood education elements that are putting kindergartners into kindergarten in that community without any exposure whatsoever to digital skills. And we have to look at after school programs that are providing support for elementary school students who have working parents and ensuring that they are properly funded. And we have to look at food programs and food insecurity in these communities, right? It's this recognition that community problems are not singly faceted, and these things are really irrevocably interlinked, and can have, you can really create positive spiral effects, positive knock-on effects when you begin to impact multiple places at a time.
Right.
You were talking about that, and it made me think of an issue that's come up with a client that is a really great issue and challenging to think through. I don't know that we've talked about this, Kevin, but about a year and a half ago, I looked back at the first decade of our work with Now It Matters, and I just did not feel confident that what we were doing is actually creating organizational change. And so spent about 6 months just researching how could we do this differently, came up with a different methodology for approaching not implementing technology, but implementing change and then managing technology. And so, all of that to say, there's a theory of change we're pursuing. And, what we found, though, is that we are seeing success at an organizational level. So first thing here is when you're talking about staff turnover, that isn't a problem everywhere in the organization, because that organization has saturated in what it does. And so it isn't new. So if they've got a new program person that's coming in, it doesn't interrupt the programs because they have that defined as part of the organization. Technology has been such a set aside piece of what they do that it just hasn't been embodied by organizations. So we think that organizational change is at the center of this, so that it doesn't just rest with one or two people that transition on. That said, one of the obvious places to start on this is fundraising and development, right? So, and we've been working with an organization that has really started to advance in this area. And it's putting pressure on the digital divide, because the staff that are working in that area are now so much more efficient than the other staff that don't have that background in the platform that we're introducing for them. And so we've ended up needing to hit pause for a minute to say, what do we do to make sure that program staff, some of whom don't have laptops or internet at home or even smartphones, and for whom there just needs to be a body of information here, just exactly what you were saying, that needs to happen. And before we start proceeding, the executive director's story on this I thought was great, was like, if you have a flat tire, you stop the car and you fix it first. And right now we've got a flat tire because we are speeding down. Some of us are much faster than others. And he was sitting in on a training that we had hosted, and he said, I know that there are a number of staff that don't know what we're talking about and don't feel comfortable saying so. And it was just at multiple turns, it just started to expose a lot of bias in the way that even Now It Matters implements and the way that technology is introduced. And so I think it's interesting, even if you start getting that right, actually what you're going to find is you may need to slow down even more.
Well, yeah, and in a lot of ways, Tim, it sounds to me like the organization you're talking about is light years ahead of a lot of organizations, because it seems like they have that executive buy-in in, hey, look, this is the direction I need to steer this organization. I know this is where we need to go. I'm having a hard time bringing everybody with me. I think far too often, and I know this has been your experience as well, a lot of times that change either happens from the bottom up, and then it becomes a contentious challenge.
Sort of a revolution inside the organization itself, which totally derails mission delivery, by the way.
Derails mission delivery. Yeah. Or worse, it becomes an unfunded mandate, right? Where you have boards who went to the latest webinar and say, oh my gosh, why are we doing this? And EDs or development directors, even if we're just talking purely about fundraising, who are saying, going like, we gotta allocate capital for that. Go out and raise some more money for us so we can do this, so then we can then go and raise more, right? And so there's a not just a leadership that has to happen from an education perspective within the organization itself, but you have to have a board who is dedicated and bought into that vision, and frankly willing to invest in what that future is going to look like. And I think far too often, the best boards are excellent at this. There's lots of great examples of that, but far too often it's uncommon in the space, and you have EDs sort of having to post hoc justify their strategic technology investments.
Yeah, it's interesting you're saying that, because what we found is that we need to stop thinking about, when we do a diagnostic, the diagnostic is at least 50%, if not more. Is this organization ready for the change we bring to it? And if it's not, we give them to an implementation partner that thinks technology only, and we'll do a project, because that will still move the needle.
Sure.
But we're not taking that work anymore, because that's not what we want to focus on. We want to focus on deep organizational change that is possible with technology. But you're exactly right. It has to be that key leader with the board support, and so you're right. They are light years ahead. It's an amazing organization.
Yeah, it's cultural, right? I mean, ultimately, that strong culture and expectation of operational excellence and what it takes to get there, and the kinds of investments that it takes to get there, sets an expectation for those line employees, and what, not only what they should do, but what they should get, right?
Yeah.
How they are supported,
yeah, absolutely.
how they are incentivized to do that work, and to continue to upskill, right? That all has to do with the kind of organization that it wants to be. Now, look, if I'm a member of a board or an ED, though, I get the dynamics of looking at that scenario and going, I can put a whole lot of my precious revenue and divert my mission focused revenue to upskilling my line employees. But if I do that and that person leaves after 18 months, because I can also only afford to pay them $25,000 a year, whew, that's a hard cost. It's a hard pill to swallow, this organizational, right, for that organizational leadership.
That's feeding a squirrel, by the way.
Yeah.
Earlier, that was where we fed the squirrel. The bird is when they stay. The bird is when they stay.
Okay.
We fed the bird when they stay. We fed the squirrel when they leave.
I'm going to work through this one after all.
Yeah.
I got to think.
Bird leaves too.
No, the birds fly and sail. The squirrel just consumes your resources. Have you never watched a bird feeder, Tim?
Birds do too. Okay. Anyway, I cannot get over this.
I have a question, Kevin. I actually have two. One is a small one and one is a big one. The small question is from your vantage point, because, using Tim's example of this organization, which is a killer org, by the way, it's a real privilege to work with them. What would you tell business partners who are responsible for implementing technology? It doesn't matter the platform. Like, what I will say in 2020 is, I don't care anymore if it's Salesforce, Dynamics, like NetSuite. I don't care. What I want to know is, where's our blindness as a community of implementation partners that we need to know that fits into the kind of work that you're trying to build over at Ballmer Group?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a couple of things that and I don't think I mentioned at the top, and I'm sure many of your listeners probably know. I spent the last decade prior to coming to Ballmer Group at Salesforce, so I'm certainly familiar with what it's like to be kind of on the inside, on the vendor end of things. I think there's probably a couple of things. One, first and foremost, is have a question that you're trying to answer, or have a goal coming in that you're going to help that organization with, right? And Microsoft, Salesforce, Social Solutions, Unitas, whoever, like, for the most part, their salespeople do a really good job about this, right?
Yeah.
But ultimately, you want to make sure that you're really transparent about, hey, look, by the time we're done with this project, you don't know the answer to this, and you're going to know the answer to this by the end of this project, right? In other words, you have to have a tangible short-term get. I think that's one. I think the second piece is this recognition that if you're going to, and we'll just use fundraising as an example, since that's what we're sort of talking about. If you're going to deploy a fundraising system into a nonprofit organization, and you're going to say, okay, the development director needs to really know how to use that, and the development staff, if they have staff, right, they're going to really need to know how to use that. I think far too often what we see was an ED saying, well, okay, just print out the report and put it on my desk, and that way I'll know what's going on, right? And shock, a year later, that ED, after the development director left, is like scratching their head and going, I just don't see the value to any of this at all, right? And so, this idea that we only train the users, the frontline users of software systems, I think is, I'm beginning to see more and more is a fallacy and is a mistake on our part as a sector. We need to recognize that the consumers of this, board members, executive directors, CEOs, really the decisioners across the organization, if you will, right, also need to have the capacity and skills to be able to take advantage of these systems. Otherwise, you're not going to get the long-term buy-in. You're not going to get the cultural changes in the organization that actually make these types of digital transformation projects sustainable long-term.
You just called back to like ancient Tracy, where I would scream at funders at conferences with a literal microphone and say, like, if you as leaders and nonprofits and funders aren't considering technology the same way that you consider finance or legal compliance, you're failing everyone. That didn't go over so well when you're screaming at people with a microphone, by the way.
Right. And of course, you have to tell them what the get is, right? So like, I get it, right? Finance compliance, like my organization goes out of business if I can no longer serve my constituents. If my books are not right, if I'm not, fully compliant with IRS guidelines and regulations on what it means to operate a nonprofit, right? Poof, I'm done. There's an existential crisis there.
Right.
Harder with digital transformation projects is that part of why leading with the intrinsic value to the organization and helping them understand, hey, look, this isn't just checking the box of I had an old software system, now I have a new software, or I had no software system and now I have a new software system. It's the so what of that we need to do a better job as a technology sector, I think, in answering.
Kevin, there is a big question here connected to all of the sort of high level goals that you've said, and it is embedded in the word equity. I'm a big believer in owning my feelings these day and ages, and and Tim will tell you this. I am terrified to be an American right now, and it is centered on that word equity. And what I want to know is, as you are literally pressing that button in both a verbal and actionable way that's putting dollars and capacity behind it at Ballmer Group, what's your hypothesis on how this work can and should continue in an increasingly nationalistic atmosphere? And increasingly in an America where there are two Americas, one that understands that word and one that wholesale rejects it, even if the output benefits them. And that's been a phenomenon that's been studied for a long time. Yeah. How do you contextualize the work? Have you seen this? Have you run into this? Or is it a bridge you haven't yet crossed at Ballmer Group?
Yeah, certainly a little bit, and we're not a political organization. We are very aware of the voice that we have, and very aware that there are perspectives on all sides of the aisle as an organization. And so we want to fully kind of acknowledge that. At the same time, there used to be the old expression, right? All politics is local. And it's funny, right? Because I think what we've seen over the course of the last, really probably more than 4 years, probably about 12 years or so, is that's increasingly not true, right? That in fact, increasingly politics is a national game, right? However, the challenges that communities face and the concerns of members of any given community are always local, right? If I live in Detroit, My politics might be national, but what I'm concerned about is my neighborhood. I'm concerned about my community. I'm concerned about the economy of the city around me. And yes, obviously, I want to go and I'm going to vote for whoever I'm going to vote for, and I'm going to care about whatever big political issue I want to care about. That's first and foremost to me. But the issues that affect my life on a day-to-day basis are not universally, but for the most part, are very much local issues around that. And so for us, what we really think about is empowering communities agnostic to sort of whatever is happening at that national scale, because it is that local empowerment that actually improves the outcomes and lives of individuals on the ground. You can't ignore the national scale, right? If you want to allocate federal CARES Act dollars to underserved elementary schools for purposes of providing device lending and connectivity, which we definitely advocated for over the course of the last year, right? Or I certainly advocated for over the course of the last year. You need to have the federal dollars there in the first place, and in order to do that, you need to have a certain kind of government in place that wants to, to pass a CARES Act bill type of funding around that. So it's not to say that you can be completely divorced from what is happening at a national scale or what's happening at the federal government level or at the state government level, but this recognition that the change that you want to see happen is still sort of agnostic to that, able to be empowered on the ground in local community. Even if all politics are not local, all change, I would argue, at least has to start at a local level. That's kind of how at least how I think about it. I don't want to speak for all of my colleagues, but certainly how I think about it.
Yeah. I mean, that makes sense. To Tim's story about working with a client, I also was working with a client here, different one, and all they're trying to do is literally replace clunker cars with more fuel efficient, less polluting vehicles. And they've had to also consider the nationalization of politics in their work now, because they're going to work equally in rural red states as they are deep blue inner cities. And I like that analysis. I just I am going to be fascinated to see how much a very polarized country comes up in these conversations, right? Because God, I don't know what else to say, right? Like, I don't know what else to do other than to just try and do good work where you can. But at the same time, like, the word equity is becoming akin to socialism, which is just a weird phenomenon anyway, because I'm like, when did this turn into the McCarthy era? Right. So.
Yeah. And I think for us as an organization, I think people very quickly get into their political corners, right? And understandably so. And I certainly have my own political corner that I would assign myself to. Ultimately though, this is all 52-48 country, a 51-49 country, and you want to have a positive impact on people's lives, agnostic to their politics, agnostic to their national politics.
That's right.
And so in order to do that, you have to acknowledge everybody's right to an opinion, even if you think it sucks. And that's, especially as a funder, it is critical for us to maintain the focus on this idea of equity. Absolutely, which I don't think should be a controversial topic. This, equality under the law is good. Equality of outcomes is not necessarily what we want, right?
Right, exactly.
Right?
Yep.
But equality of opportunity and equity in opportunity, and understanding that, me who grew up in I was very middle class. I wasn't affluent by any stretch, but a middle class sort of suburb, right? Then I had an 8086 at home in 1986, right? When I was 6 or 7 years old, right? And that opened doors for me, unbeknownst to me at the time, later on in my life. That was absolutely a result of that middle class privilege of having a computer on my desk in the 80s. And that opportunity is far too often not afforded to equally or more talented individuals out there in a lot of these places. And I can't say that, Sue or Joe or whomever, right, is going to end up in the same place that I'm at, or that you guys are at, or that anybody else is at who has had a professional career, right? I can't say that they're going to end up there, but they should have an opportunity to. They should have the same chance to do that I did. And they might make different life choices for different reasons, right? But that equality of opportunity, that equal access to technology, that equal access to that opportunity, that's the American dream, right? I mean, that is the whole point of free market capitalism, I guess, if you will, in a way, right? I know that's going to be a little bit of a dirty word, but it is predicated on this idea that everybody gets to be an equal participant in that market, and we've got a job to do to make sure that happens still.
Yeah, it's funny. Like, this is in some way a discussion of what do bootstraps actually look like, right? Because that is the American dream. And you're right. Like, same experience. I had an Apple IIc that I was hammering on, learning, the now defunct and utterly useless, but still interesting ProDOS. Like, I'm like, great. Like, I learned ProDOS, but what that actually did was diminish my fear of jumping into technology. And I think when I look at the struggles of, some of the people who are my age and older, there is that fear because not all of us grew up with a computer. So now it's like, oh my God, my iPhone is just killing me. And I'm like, why is this killing you? This should be like a personalized, door delivery thing. And then you translate that to younger folks who don't have that opportunity from the get-go to get over that hurdle of, I can think this through. The digital divide has become exacerbated because of that absence of opportunity. And, I like the idea that, this is a patriotic message. Sorry, I know it's weird, but I've been thinking in terms like this lately because I'm like, how do we appeal to an innate sense of unity and patriotism and not just get caught up in the whole sort of weird nationalistic discourse that's happening right now?
Yeah, and I'll tell you that my general perception has been that there's, I don't want to say universal agreement around that idea, but there is certainly, cultural bipartisan support for this idea that everybody should have an equal shot at the American dream, right? Such as it is. And it's not just about, hey, I got to learn on a computer at that age. It's the cultural context that comes with that. Just an anecdote. I had an opportunity during my interview process to interview one-on-one with Steve Ballmer, right? And while I don't think this is necessarily what led to him leading me, making me an offer to come and join the Ballmer Group, I was able to say to him, hey, Steve, I remember growing up, I had this, we had these 3 books that came with the computer, and one was beige, that was the DOS book. There was a maroon one, that was the basic book. And then there was the the BIOS book, which was, I think, gray, if I'm not mistaken. And he just laughed. He said, oh my God, I can't believe you remember that, right? And it's like, again, it's not just that I knew how to use a computer, it's that you have a cultural context and a grounding that allows you to easily move in those spaces in ways that somebody without that background is much more challenged to be able to do. And it's such a smoother path in a lot of ways for somebody like myself. And you can either be the kind of person who says like, woohoo, I'm on top, like, I win, right? And suck it all, you people down there, right? Or what you're gonna say is like, wow, I had a lot of opportunity. I was given a lot of advantages to get where I've been able to get. And and I've had a successful career, and I've got a great family and a great life. Like, how do I turn around and try and figure out how to help other people do that and give other people access to that same opportunity that I had?
Yeah,
end up in
that's
the same
right.
place I did. Some of them are going to end up doing way better than I did. Some are going to end up doing way worse, but they're going to have the same opportunity. And that's just, that to me is the ongoing sort of it's just a waste of the nation's talents, if nothing else, right? Like, not to mention just people's lives. Like it's Yeah.
It's funny because so much of that cultural context, it's like, that's why I try to like remove sports ball references in my talk. If anything, I'll turn it into Quidditch or something stupid because it points out the asininity of those things in the first place as a unifying factor between people.
Yeah,
Or
so
birds and squirrels, for example.
yeah.
Oh, that thing is going to work. That metaphor is going to work. I'm going to make it work.
It's never. So, okay. One interesting piece in all of this. So I do live in a very red state. Now I live in a blue island of Bozeman in the red state of Montana.
Very blue island, very red state.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that one of the reasons I got so drawn to SDGs is because I feel like it cuts through a lot of BS to just be like, I don't care what you're doing in your off hours or what you think, like, that doesn't matter. What, like, on these 17 things, can we just agree like they're generally the right direction? And it just cuts through a lot of that. And, maybe start arguing at the framework level about how you go about that, which is where, like, you're going to hit a lot of snags, and you should. These are important things.
Yeah.
I just feel like the power of impact metrics is that you can actually get symbolic agreement. And then the problem with them is that those of us that work with nonprofits know enough to not trust the data, which takes all of the power out of the symbol and turns them into pure marketing.
Yeah.
And so, Kevin, I just think, as you were saying, all politics is local. It made me think all data is local. And the issue with impact metrics, and this is what I love about what you're doing, the issue with impact metrics is that until you can get data, like small data working, you can't get big data working. And impact metrics are kind of the mother of all big data. I'm curious if that's stuff that you work with, or is that on your mind as you're doing this work?
Yeah, absolutely. We sort of jokingly talk about sort of like Maslow's hierarchy of data, right? Like, where do you?
That's great.
That is great. Yeah, like.
Okay, that's better than birds and squirrels.
Like, do I belong to the squirrels or the birds? Okay, I'm done.
So the way that we sort of think about this is, how do you help organizations take baby steps in order to be able to sort of measure their impact in really real ways? And I think the most obvious and first way that you can do that is really kind of at what we think about as sort of population health, right? So there's a lot of, the census pours millions of dollars into every year, tens of millions of dollars, right? I haven't looked at the latest census budgets, right? And basically says, okay, we'd be able to tell you down to a census tract level how individuals in this community in aggregate are doing on a variety of different metrics. And we're going to slice and dice this by age. We're going to slice and dice this by race and ethnicity. We're going to slice and dice this by income level. And you can get really phenomenal data, but it is in aggregate. And it gives you not a question. It doesn't tell you if your nonprofit's being effective. It can give you correlation, but not causation, right?
Yep.
It's like 8-bit resolution in like a 64-bit world.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Well put. I like that one. That's good too. And so a lot of what we do, at least initially with places, is say, look, at a baseline level, can you look at this? And can you analyze a population level health data set about your community and say something intelligent about it, and go to policymakers and go to your local government and go to your state government and say, look at what is happening in my community. We need this. Here's the data to prove it, right? Like that's step one. That's the crawl part, right? You got to get to that level. Step two, in my mind, is really about what we would call sort of program data or organizational efficiency data, right? How well are we operating as an organization? How many people are we impacting? Who are they? And here's where you can really begin to not only collect data for the purposes of improving how you run your programs in an organization, but you can begin to think about how those impacts are correlating back to that population level health a little more cleanly and clearly, right? And so that's kind of like the you know, if you got the crawl, that's the walk. Well, so what's the run, right? Well, the run is this data utopia that I think you're sort of alluding to there, Tim, in a lot of ways, right? Which is, okay, I've got constituent records about the individuals who I am serving. I know that Tracy is participating in after-school programs on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and that since she started, you know, 6 months ago, her GPA has steadily increased over that time. I don't know if it's because of that, but it certainly seems to be helping. Maybe we can look at other, right? You really begin to say something intelligent. And, you know, as you think about how you scaffold that data back up and how that begins to accurately reflect those high level metrics that you're talking about, Tim, the SDGs, you know, those other types of outcome or measurement and evaluation types of impact metrics, right, or outcome metrics. That's the gold right there, right? Like when that data can truly begin to scaffold and you can really start to say very intelligent things about the impact of your programs on individuals' lives and how that is changing their longer term outcomes. But those are causative and correlative challenges. Those are longitudinal data tracking challenges. Those are baseline and comparative challenges, right? There's a lot of a glue that holds all of that together that, you know, not every organization has, but we want to try and help them get there.
It's also community organizing challenges.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And you have to absolutely have to in this day and age ensure that the community has the trust and the efficacy and the control over that data as well, right? Nothing about us without us, and that is absolutely the case. There's a lot of different ways to do that. Like we could spend 45 minutes talking about the value of like decentralized trust in a blockchain and, you know, like all that kind of nonsense. But it's true, right? That community has to feel efficacy in the work that you're doing. Otherwise, you're patronizing, right?
Yeah. And you're leaving people behind.
Absolutely.
We are at the end of our time. Kevin, parting thoughts. What's been unarticulated in your mind that, you know, I mean, I maybe that's probably too big of a question, but
articulated my mind's like 98% of it.
Yeah, that's why I'm like, wait, we got to refine this just a little bit. What is the any other messages that you want to get out there regarding, you know, this work and honestly the interconnectivity of it all, which this is really a great discussion about why we all latch onto one thing and think it's a solution, but there's many more things that need to be bolted on. So
absolutely, yeah,
you know.
absolutely. You know, like, you know, in my time at Salesforce, I probably you know, especially early on, had this sort of myopic belief that, hey, look, it was the field of dreams approach, right? If we build it, great things will happen around it. And I think, to be honest with you, I don't think there's anything wrong with that necessarily. My job at that time was to build the best piece of software that we could possibly build. And that was what I needed to sort of focus on in order to be effective in that role. But I think at some point you start to drink your own Kool-Aid around that and think like, well, we'll just keep throwing a good thing out there. And eventually it's gonna, like, some good stuff's gonna happen, right? What you said, Tracy, I think is exactly right. It is a systemic challenge that is impacting multiple sectors. It cannot just be philanthropy. It can't just be local government. It can't just be state and federal actors that come in to support these communities. It can't be tech vendors. It can't be system implementers. It can't be ISVs. It can't be you know, big five consultancies, right? It's got to be everybody, and everybody recognizing that while we're all coming at this from a very different perspective, everybody has a really critical a voice in the right way to sort of solve for this. I think the thing that really has struck me most is, you know, you sit inside of a tech vendor and you survey the world around you, and you're talking to these organizations, and they're saying like, well, look, this is the budget that I have. There's nothing more I can do. And you sort of go like, gosh, why don't these funders just fund this properly? So it's, and
yeah.
And you remove yourself from that and you get a little bit of perspective and you have an opportunity to sit in somebody else's shoes for an extended period of time, and you begin to recognize that it's not just funders needing to fund more, we do, but it's implementers needing to recognize that you can't have a 9-month engagement and be done. And it's tech vendors recognizing that, hey, we just can't catapult software over the wall at somebody and expect it's just going to do a net good in society. It's boards recognizing that these are long-term systemic and cultural changes that need to happen. It's government recognizing that we need to figure out how to buttress the nonprofit sector as a whole, particularly if we're not going to view government as a vehicle for supporting those communities. It's all of it. And that makes it both, I think, incredibly challenging, but also incredibly exciting and a fascinating place to be in. And just me, feel privileged to have an opportunity to spend my career working on this.
As somebody that's benefited for years from the work that you've done at Salesforce, and know that the work you're doing here is going to produce results, I just want to say thanks. You really have continued to make a difference, and I'm glad for you to come on and share some of your story today. So thanks for taking the time.
My pleasure, Tim, and I'm humbled by that statement because I think, as you well know and have heard me say many times, there's a lot of really brilliant people that surrounded me at Salesforce that made me look better than I was, and I think that's true here at Ballmer Group as well, and I suspect that's true in a lot of places. But thank you, and all kudos to all the folks both at Salesforce, at obviously my colleagues at Ballmer Group, but if you're at Microsoft or Blackbaud or Social Solutions, or you're at Now It Matters, or you're at Bigger Boat or anywhere else, like, kudos to you as well, because it takes everybody.
It's a great way to end it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Awesome.